what Octavia pushes back on is you do not know where liberation is happening. You don't know where those seeds have taken root. You have to actually sit with people, look in their eyes, ask the key questions you need to know the answers to, and actually sense at a gut level, is this someone who's trustworthy?
I'm Autumn Brown, a queer science fiction writer, a theologian, a mother of dragons, and a healing justice facilitator for social movements living in rural Minnesota.
And I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, author of Emergent Strategy, co-editor of Octavia's Brood, writer, facilitator, auntie, doula, and pleasure activist living in Detroit.
And this is How to Survive the End of the World,
our podcast about learning from apocalypse with grace, rigor, and curiosity.
All right. We are going to have a conversation that we feel like, we should probably lead this conversation, as we often lead many of our conversations, with a bit of a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about how we sustain movements under state violence and repression, and how we respond in the crises that are created under conditions of state violence and repression. And so, of course, we're going to be talking about some of the specific types of state violence that we ourselves have witnessed, and that other activists and organizers that we are in community have witnessed or have experienced directly. So we will be talking about assault, we will be talking about murder, and we will be talking about how we sustain ourselves and sustain our souls, and sustain the work, in spite of and through those kinds of moves that the state and various apparatuses of the state will take to stop us from transforming society.
We have a quote from Octavia Butler, and we're going to be talking a lot about what she's offered into this conversation. But the quote that seemed right for this is this piece of Earthseed. In order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix first must burn. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time I read that, it struck me so intensely. And then reading it in the context of the parable of the talents, where a huge part of what happens is this beautiful, idealistic community has been developed, and then it gets completely smashed by this right-wing Christian operation that is kind of backed by the state and aligned with the state's politics in a way that feels very present and like what we're living in right now. And they go through everything. Their community gets destroyed. People are killed. People are enslaved and forced to work the land. People are separated from their kids. People are separated from their loved ones. People are all being imprisoned in the same space and really witnessing the terror and the impact.
Yeah, and similar to what's happening right now, not only are people in the Acorn community separated from their kids, but their kids are literally taken completely away from them and actually adopted out into quote unquote good Christian families. So most of the people who are in the Acorn community, even once they're able to overthrow their oppressors, most of them are never able to recover their children, or never. It's I think almost completely for all of the families there. I think none of them are able to be reunited with their children.
Right. So again, that feels a lot like what we're fighting right now and trying to stop from happening right now with our borders, where we're like, oh, we're living in a country where this is actively happening right now. People are being separated from their children with no clarity on when they'll be reunited, no sense of clear guidelines or rules or any of those things, no sense of humanity. it's racism and it's attack and it's xenophobia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say to our listeners that we're going to dive in like kind of deep on the hard part, and then our goal is to really then talk about how we keep sustaining relationships and holding movement and moving forward. So we want to land in a place that really has us oriented towards what do we do, but in order to get there, there's some pieces that we need to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Autumn, to start off with sharing about your friend, Brad.
Yeah. So when Adrian and I were talking about doing this show, we were talking about um, how the internet itself has actually changed the way that we all relate to, view, and understand state violence. And because of the fact that that video documentation of state violence as it's unfolding is more readily available to our generation than it's ever been available to anyone. And I was thinking about the fact that one of the most sort of painful and, I think, sort of like fault line experiences that I had as a young activist was the murder of my comrade Brad Will. And he was murdered 11 years ago on October 27th, while he was working as a journalist in Oaxaca and documenting the uprising there. And so his murder was caught. He actually captured his own murder on film because he was filming with his camera at the time that he was shot. And someone, I'm not sure who actually, but someone uploaded the footage to a website. And so within a couple of days of learning that he had been murdered, all of us who were in community with him had access to that footage. And many,
Yeah.
I still have a very clear memory of like exactly where I was and who I was with when I sat down and watched the footage of his murder. And it really, I mean, it changed us. I mean, obviously that sort of feels like almost silly or flippant to say, but it really did. For those of us who were, I talk about this often when I talk to folks about the history of the Rock Dove Collective, because the Rock Dove Collective was the reason why I knew Brad, that he was a co-founder of that project, which was a mutual aid based healthcare project that I and a bunch of other activists co-created when we were living in New York back in the aughts. And he was murdered within the first year of us starting that project, and it really, like, it changed the way the rest of us who were in that collective, it changed the way that we understood our relationship to each other, and it changed the way we understood what our work even was, right? Because it's one thing to be like, we're trying to figure out how to, from the beginning of that project, we were looking at the question of how do we actually sustain individuals' involvement in this incredibly painful, difficult work, right? The painful, difficult work of trying to change the way society functions and deal with systemic oppression. Like, we very much had this sort of orientation of, obviously we want mutual aid based networks of care and healthcare that are available to everybody, but we're particularly focusing on activists and organizers from the beginning. And then we lose one of ours, and it changed the way that we understood why our work mattered, right? Because suddenly everyone in our community that we're working with is completely traumatized, both by the loss of this person, but also by the fact that we all witnessed how he died, right?
Yes.
And so suddenly were called in to provide support at a completely different level than what we had been prepared for or thinking about. And so
Yes.
it really, really changed how we understood what our work was. And it really was very humbling because we very quickly realized how out of our depth both we were, but also how anyone who's in anyone who's in movement, how out of our depth we all really are in terms of actually being able to confront those kinds of traumatic conditions. And um so I think about that experience still to this day
Yeah.
when I anytime I hear that there is video documentation of someone being murdered by the state, because in this case, in Brad's case, it's I think pretty much been proven that the person who actually murdered him was a functionary of the Mexican state, was
Hmm.
probably this judge. um and so anytime I know that there is video documentation available or coming forward of someone in community here being murdered by a functionary of the state or by the state itself, it it takes me back immediately to that moment, and I have to be really careful in terms of how I engage with it. And
Yeah.
I find that if I know that the video is out there, then I really reduce my engagement with social media until I feel ready to actually see it, so that it's happening on my terms, that I'm going
Yeah.
to actually like look at it. Um and yet I think that the fact that, like, I think it's so important that these videos are available, and I feel like there's something about the omnipresent way that they become available that I find questionable or concerning, because I think that people are not necessarily accessing choice in terms of whether they're engaging with the material, and it is traumatizing material,
Yeah.
obviously, to be engaging with.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I feel like that feels like a big question for me of like, how as how as activists and organizers do we orient to the reality of this? Like, this is our reality, is that that if we do this work, the likelihood that we will attract repressive violence from the state is very high. How do we and that we're losing our own people? How do we interact with that without losing our minds? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what it is. It's like without losing our minds and without losing our capacity to take action. Um, and to, it's like how to be properly careful and properly afraid and also keep moving. Um,
Mhm.
and so I want to share, a few things on my side of this. Um, a few years ago, I got to meet an activist named Berta Caceres, and she was the co-founder of the Popular Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. And I got
Mm.
to be part of a panel with her at the Environmental Grant Makers Association. And we only spent a morning together. And so it always blows my mind that it has this much impact on me. But she was one of those people who, like, as soon as you're at a table with her, in a room with her, you can feel the personal power that she has. Like, she is
Wow.
shifting the world, she's
Mhm.
changing the world. And we were speaking with an interpreter. So we were having, it still blows my mind, like the kind of depth that we reached in a very short period of time with this person doing interpreting for us and interpreting for the room. And she was so captivating and so powerful, that I think it was one of the most powerful speeches and talks I've ever seen anyone do, period, ever.
Mhm.
And it just showed me, like, you know, having these spaces where people are able to all come and move the world and shape the world in their own tongue is actually so crucial.
Yeah.
Like, that
Yeah.
nothing was lost in translation, that actually something was gained by the collaborative work of it. But she was doing this environmental work and indigenous rights work in Honduras, and um, and she had said, she was like, I have reason to be afraid for my life. Like, she understood that she was in a period of great risk.
Yeah.
And on March 3rd, so I met her in the fall of 2015, and just started following her work. And she was winning awards. She was in the US people, she was on the radar of organizers here. And then on March 3rd of 2016, she was assassinated in her home. And
Mm.
she was killed. You know, the folks, I think as of 2017, they were doing investigation around like, you know, who actually was responsible for her assassination. And it traced back to troops who had been trained in the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Wow. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was devastating for the community, devastating for so many folks who were actually trying to hold back the lines around environmental and climate crisis and
Mm-hmm.
around indigenous sovereignty, and how those things are deeply linked together, because so much of the
Mm-hmm.
time it's like trying to remove the people who know and protect and love a place in order to then pillage and rape the land of that
Right.
place.
Right.
And so that is one piece where I was just like, oh, how do the organizers in Honduras continue? How do we as an international and, you know, as a global movement that is trying to do this work around climate and environmental justice continue?
Not to
Um,
mention the fact that, like, I think if I remember correctly, she had 4 kids. So
mhm.
I think that there's also that component of like, there's like the layer inside the layer inside the layer of like, and now, because anytime something like this happens, there's a way that the community also has to respond to ensure that the children or direct cared for people of these folks who have been murdered are getting the
Yeah.
level of support that they need.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's the family just gets like disappeared also inside the
Yeah.
conversation about like, how are we responding to this person's murder? I don't know how that went down with her family, but I mean, that's just
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I actually, you know, there's a lot that I'm not sure of. Around like her family. I know that she had children, and I know
Mm-hmm.
that her children have, some of them have spoken out, I believe,
Mm.
but it's something that I would dive into more. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm also thinking about folks. So, you know, there's folks like her who are taking an explicit risk. Like, they're like, I'm aware of the risk that I'm taking.
Right.
Brad, you know, there's like, I'm aware of some of the danger of that I'm taking. Although in Brad's case, you know, that idea of like, I'm covering something that
Right.
has always been like, that'll be safe, is like, you know, we just go in and out of that actually being a safe space. And to me, that's one of the biggest growing signs of fascism, is when you cannot expect that the media can be safe in trying to tell the truth about what's happening to
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
population. I also think there's stuff where it's a little more mysterious. Like, it's like, what's actually happening? So I want to bring in here the Ferguson assassinations,
Mm.
the Ferguson activists who have been killed since the uprising there. And it's DeAndre Joshua, Darren Seals, and most recently Edward Crawford. And Edward was the person who was in the sort of iconic shot of the person throwing the throwing like the lit cocktail, Molotov cocktail. He's wearing like, he's got the American flag in his hand, and there's like a
Mm-hmm.
fire behind him, and he's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so he was, all of these folks were shot, and there's this really big question around like, how do we start to tie together when something is happening and what is happening, and how do we actually turn our attention when it's needed, to be like, we're asking people to take such risks, and we're all benefiting from those risks. Like, every person in this country, I believe, really benefits from activists and organizers challenging a status quo that makes people endangered, based on race, based on class, based on ethnicity, based on gender, based on sexuality. Like, all of those, as long, you know, I really believe that as long as any one of us is endangered by the state, all of us are endangered by the state, because what we
Right.
allow then is a pattern in which the state can determine who gets to live, who gets to die, who's a human, who's not a human. And there's no difference to me between that and chattel slavery or a Holocaust condition. Like, as long as you are as long you're on that spectrum, basically, of saying some people have rights and some don't. And we're actively on that spectrum here in the
Right.
US right now. And to me, one of the main ways you measure that is whose deaths matter and how
Yes.
do they matter?
Mm-hmm.
And whose deaths do we look at and whose deaths do we turn away from? I
Mm-hmm.
think so much of the work of Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives and Mi Gente, um, all these movements that have been rising up in this moment is to be like, all of these lives actually matter and the deaths actually matter. They mean
Yes.
something to us. We
Yes.
will not let you turn away from them. We see the pattern.
Yeah.
We won't be
We
fooled
see the
because
political significance of each of these murders.
exactly.
Right.
We understand what's happening. And I feel like it's so, just to me, it's so important to name this because we grew up in an environment where this is an assassination nation, you know? Like, I feel like I never want to pretend like we don't have a huge history of this happening. And most recently with the civil rights movement, of this
Mm-hmm.
really bringing a movement to what felt like a stop for decades.
Right.
And,
Right.
I think that it's important to know that every time we make those moves forward, the backlash is so intense. And I think that, you know, when I was younger, I remember feeling like I can just take so much risk. I can be in this theoretical revolutionary mode and just, you know, do stuff. And that it felt like it wasn't a time when so much repression was coming down. And what I recognize now is that that was just because I was a privileged college kid, and that blocks away from me, Amadou Diallo was getting killed in front of his house. Like blocks down from me, people were getting picked up by Giuliani's street squads all the time, activists, non-activists, right? I also want to talk about the lines between those who are doing movement work and those who are just in communities that are living inside these issues, because I think
Right.
those lines
Right.
get really blurred.
Mm-hmm.
And we,
Like
you know,
who the state actually sees as a threat. You know, like, because there is a thing that happens in the activist community where, like, we think that if the state is going to come after somebody, it's going to be us. But, like, the state has a really different viewpoint often about, like, who actually needs to be repressed in order for a community to remain as disempowered as the state needs it to be.
yeah,
And I think that that's really, like, it's choiceful for the state to murder the children. Like,
yeah,
it's not an accident that, like, that many of the people who are targeted by the state in the Black community are teenage men and teenage women, right? That it's like old enough to be viewed as an adult, but young enough to be experienced as the deaths of children. Like, I
yes,
think it's not like that kind of behavior is not coincidental. And I think that, like, and it speaks to the particular psychology of that type of oppression or
yeah,
the type of repression of people's power, that it's like we are looking to not just repress you, but to demoralize you to the extent that you don't believe it's actually worth it to do
yes,
anything to stop this from happening, right? Like, that's our goal. You know, it's like, and it's the
yes,
same tactics that we see the Israeli government using in Palestine, right? Like,
exactly,
they're doing the exact same thing. They're going after young teenage Palestinian boys, right? That, like, that's who they're going house to house, breaking in the middle of the
and
night,
girls,
and
yeah,
girls, right? And, like, checking their papers. Like,
yes,
it's terror, you know? So
it's terror.
it's yeah.
And I just finished reading Homegoing by Yajasi, and I can't stop talking about this book, but it basically talks about the Middle Passage and the slave trade and what was the thinking of the slave owners and the folks who were actually moving folks along. You see so many different angles of it, but one of the things they talk about is that, like, it's really intentional, this idea of breaking people. And I think that idea or that strategy of breaking people has not really gone anywhere. And I read a piece this week. I'm going to try to figure out who wrote this piece. It was really moving to me. It was about the cruelty is the point. It's in the Atlantic. And it actually looks at the Museum of African American History and Culture, and going back the way we did and sort of being like, oh, okay, Adam Surer is the writer of this. But it talks about how President Trump and his supporters find community by rejoicing in the suffering of those they hate and fear, right? So for me, it comes up so powerfully because I'm like, we're talking about these situations that for us are so traumatizing and so scary and designed to create these boundaries around us that make us feel we should not keep fighting for power. And then you step back and you're like, it's happening at the level of death and violence, but it's also happening at the level of just attacking anyone who tries to come up with what feels like a logical way forward. So like other examples of this are, Rebecca Solnit just posted a piece where one of the Sandy Hook parents was saying that they finally, after all these years, have stopped getting hate mail. And it's like, why would you send someone hate mail when their child has been killed, right? And it's because Sandy Hook is being used as a way to challenge gun ownership and gun laws, right? And there's a conservative body in this country that's just like, we will not consider any reasonable, logical options on this. It just has to be that everyone has access to something that is killing our children and we don't give a fuck, right? So that's one level of it that we just, that trolling becomes so real. It's like trolling happens on the internet and it happens in these real life ways where it's just like all the attention, all this negative, horrific, hateful, anti-human attention starts moving. I think with the Kavanaugh hearings, it's been so deep to just see again how when a woman or multiple women step forward to be like, I am a victim, someone caused me harm, that the first moves that we make on a public level is to attack and try to destroy the victim for stepping forward, right? And like in each of these scenarios, that's what's happening is we're saying, here's someone who's a victim. They're either acting as a movement person, that victim, or they're just living their fucking lives and they're a victim. And they're responding and being like, hey, this shit fucking isn't fair. And I want to change the situation. The situation. I want to change this situation.
Let's write a whole piece about that.
Like compost it. But this person, people standing up for themselves in a way that they should absolutely be able to do and getting attacked, getting their lives destroyed, their reputations destroyed, their families attacked. They have to move out of their houses. They're in danger or they're straight up shot in their car. I mean, it's just like, this is the time that we're living in, right?
Right. And conversely, the story that's being told, right? Like it's amazing to watch like the mainstream media narrative where I don't remember who said this first. It's like it was an article that came out shortly after the election of Donald Trump where someone was writing about the whole problem of how the mainstream media interacts with the concept of identity politics. And, and they were tracing the lineage of that terminology, identity politics, and like really claiming it and owning it as like, this is a term that comes to us from Black feminism. And like, it's a term that's really essentially about saying because of whiteness and the racialization that flows out of whiteness, all identity is political. That's what we're saying. Right. And so, and the person inside in that piece said, they were critiquing like liberals and leftists for trying to move away from identity politics and being like, hey, y'all, you don't walk into a narrative that's been constructed by your oppressors and say like, yeah, that story is true for me, like, I feel like I feel like I'm watching the same thing play out in the mainstream media right now about this, where it's like the narrative that it's Brett Kavanaugh's life that's been upended by this is like another one of those like sick reversals. And yet the mainstream media, I mean, not even just the mainstream media, but many media outlets are like taking on this narrative and asking the question about like, is it fair?
Yes.
And it's just
it's so, it's so interesting to me. I think that this is like the public and collective gaslighting process, right? Where you take something, in each of these cases, you take something where someone is saying, I'm trying to actually do good for my community. I'm trying to help people be better. I experienced some kind of harm. I want to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. So I'm going to try to take, that's 90,000% of these cases. It's like something happened to me that is inhumane and it should not happen anymore. And I'd like to stop that from happening. And then the gaslighting flips it on the person and says, actually, you speaking the harm aloud, that causes harm to me. And now I'm the victim. And, I think we see that with Kavanaugh, with Cosby, with all these different people. And then with America at large, like as a project, as a political project, where people really feel like America is under attack. when its own basic constitution is brought into the light and spoken aloud, people feel like the freaking
How
country
dare
is
you?
under attack,
Right.
right? So I think that then we say, okay, we're in this period. It feels illogical. It feels, it feels irrational. It feels hysterical. And it's hard not to land into a reactionary way of just being in the world. And so I do want to uplift this thing that I said a while ago, because it helps me pivot and start to look at Acorn and Zapatistas and other models of like, how do people survive and keep moving forward? Mm-hmm. So it's this, things are not getting worse, they're getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. I really believe that so many of these cases are like, when they get exposed, when we see, oh, this is what's happening, to me, we have to understand it as like, this is happening all the time.
Right.
This has been happening. This is what humans are up to and what we're doing to each other.
Right.
And it's Grace's birthday. I mean, it's Grace's, it's the anniversary of Grace's passing today, the day that we're recording this, October 5th. And, Grace Lee Boggs, she talked about so many things in her life. But she was always asking, like, what is the time that we're actually in? Like, what time is it on the clock of the world? What moment are we in? And I feel like we often miss the moments that we're in. Like, we don't know the context that we're in. And these moments of trauma make it even harder to understand the moments that we're in. And so in this moment, I'm like, I could see that we are winning. Like, I could see a way in which we are actually, and not winning on the like win, lose, let's go back and forth with these violent people, but actually winning in the sense of exposing that there are people who are aligned with humanity and people who are not aligned with humanity. And that's the level of distinction that we're talking about right now. And we have to stop trying to pretend like we can appeal to the moral code of those who are actually not aligned with humanity.
Right.
And I think that that's what we keep doing, is we're like, well, look at all this trauma and violence. Let's just put all of our energy on elections. Look at all this trauma and violence. Let's put all of our energy on policy change. If we can just change the policy, if we can just appeal to these people. And I think this is a big part of claiming Dr. Ford's dignity, Dr. Blasey Ford's victory, or claiming any of these victories, is saying like, we're not going to win by playing the game of violent oppressors. We have to actually create new terms and new locations and go towards a greater destiny. And so this is where Octavia becomes our teacher again, is that she offers us what happened after Acorn was destroyed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a couple of things in terms of what you just shared, so I love this orientation from Grace Lee Boggs of like, do we know what the time is on the clock of the world? And actually, I would say, I think that the particular types of trauma and violence that we are like living through are indicators for us about what is the time on the clock of the world, if we're willing to like look at them directly and take seriously what the data shows us, right?
Yes.
And I really agree with you, right? That like, and I say this all the time to the organizers that I work with, that like, we have to always understand our losses in relation to our wins. And we have to always understand our failures in relationship to our victories. Like that oftentimes the things that feel like losses are only happening in the wake of extraordinary movement building, you know, and, I feel like I've been like a broken record on this for the last year, but like there's very direct relationship between what happened in 1968 and what's happening in 2018 in terms of like what type of person is getting elected on what type of platform in the wake of what level of movement victories, right? Wow. Like we cannot pretend that this right now, I don't agree with people who are like, this is the death rattle of white supremacy, because it's not a death rattle. But I would say that like, we have to recognize that like, it's another one of those fault line moments. And I do think that like, I really appreciate what you said about, we have to stop like wasting all of our energy on appealing to like the moral code of people who don't have a moral code, because I think that that's real. And I remember too recently that this environmental activist, environmental and food justice activist who I adore, LaDonna Redmond.
Oh, yeah.
Who has recently gone through her own really significant painful loss, again
Yep.
talking about like our community and people going through significant traumas, and she's been very like just incredible in terms of her public open grieving.
Yes.
But she always says, she's like, we are so focused on the 2% of people who will never agree with us that we
Yes.
miss the 98% of people who are ready to be moved by our story, right? And I think that that's part of the challenge of like of I think the challenge of the way trauma and violence actually does relate to our political strategy, because one of the things that we know about trauma and violence, or traumatic experiences, period,
Yeah.
whether they're violent or not, or whether they involve like direct violence or not, is that trauma disorders the
Yes.
memory. It disorders our ability to like it makes it really hard for us to be able to order something and make a story out of it, right? I mean, this is a big
Yes.
part of what Dr. Blasey Ford was talking about actually in her testimony, because she's a
Yes.
scientist. And that means that it's very easy in the wake of a traumatic experience or inside of a traumatic experience to become very myopically focused on
Yes.
the one thing that feels visible to you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that like it's like to me there's a connection there between the fact that we are living inside of chronically traumatic conditions,
Yeah.
and the fact that it means that those of us who are often are on the receiving end of various types of state repression become very myopically focused on particular strategies,
Yes.
and think that like our strategy is the only strategy that works. So like
Yes.
I have to do
Yes.
X, Y, Z in order to move this percentage of people in order to win this many legislative seats. And like, that's
Yes.
the only thing that's going to keep us in
Yes.
power. Right. And it's like, okay, deep breaths.
Yeah.
That's a strategy.
Yes.
How does that strategy interact with the collective? Like, how does that
Yes.
strategy interact with all of the other strategies that we could potentially be using right now?
Yeah.
Because we actually need all of them.
Well, and I'm so excited because I feel like you're previewing a bit of one of our upcoming episodes where we're going to have 3-point strategies come on and talk about this upcoming election from a perspective of community organizing, from a perspective of like moving a Black agenda forward, and really
Yes.
they work in such a sense of interconnected strategy. So I'm super happy that, because I deeply agree with you. And I also feel like there's something about letting go of strategies that you're not actually going to move. And trusting, it's like there's folks out there, like some of the folks that we've shared that have died at the hands of the state are folks who are like, I'm actively moving a direct action strategy, or I'm actually challenging the government directly. That's a choice that I'm making. And then there's folks who are like, I'm actively going to move an electoral strategy, or folks who are like, I'm actively going to move a media strategy, or whatever it is. But I feel like folks don't acknowledge like, you can move your strategy and everyone else doesn't have to. And this is where I think it starts to really get into Octavia teaching, because one of the things that happened after Acorn was destroyed was I feel like Lauren Olamina, the main character, she kind of has an aha moment of like, I can't get everyone. Like,
Right.
I can't do these massive institution building projects where I just make a location and try to keep that safe. That's not actually the way that we're going to be able to get to this massive vision of a destiny for human beings to take root amongst the stars. It's
Right.
not going to happen. And I love that as a destiny, because it's just like so grand and so beyond just being an oppressed person trying to get out of oppression. Like
Right.
so
Right.
often I'm like, that cannot be the goal.
I'm not
of
trying to get free.
humanity.
I'm trying to get to the stars.
Exactly. Right. It's just sort of like, I'm actually done with this whole experiment, the way that you're doing it. And, there's lots to play with there, because I love this planet. I'm a huge fight for getting to be on this planet and not be oppressed every day, and not be at threat of death every day, and be in communities that are like that. And I also feel like this planet, the people that we are of have to earn ourselves. We have to earn each other. And there's a lot of folks who are like, I'm like, I don't know if you've earned me, y'all. Like, I don't know if you really deserve all this Black brilliance that we're bringing to y'all. Like, I don't know if y'all, like you've been throwing it away for so long. I
Right.
just don't know if we can keep offering it to you. But I want to point out 2 other strategies, or a couple of strategies. One is that Lauren Olamina, after she leaves, after Acorn is smashed, starts going door to door and building deep relationships of trust with people and just being very explicit. Like, this is my vision. This is what I want to see happen. Are you down? Are you not down? Let's keep building, which I often think of as the Zapatista model. Like, it's like going door to door and building a relationship and doing that in an underground way rather than a big overt campaign funder driven model of organizing. Like, it's about the actual ideas being in motion. And the second piece is combating the isolation of trauma, of traumatic organizing experiences by moving into deeper relationship with allies and really understanding, like Octavia challenges me so much on this, that everyone potentially is a revolutionary ally. And we have to get to where we can see that, which I think right now, one of the ways we respond to trauma is like, let's make ourselves very small. Like all of those people are bad, you know, and we start putting more and more people into the sets of people who are all horrible. Right. And then when folks within those say something like, you know, not all of us, we're like, we ridicule
you
that.
too, bitch.
It's like literally all of you, right? And I get it, because I'm just like, as a survivor of multiple kinds of oppression, I'm also like, it's easier for me if I just write you all off and don't have to try to figure out amongst you who might be good. And what Octavia pushes back on is you do not know where liberation is happening. You don't know where those seeds have taken root. You have to actually sit with people, look in their eyes, ask the key questions you need to know the answers to, and actually sense at a gut level, is this someone who's trustworthy? This is why I'm doing all this somatics all the time, because I'm like, you know, I remember doing organizing with people where I was like, are you a federal agent? Like, are you someone trustworthy? Are you coming from some place? Like, I don't trust it. I can't tell you why. There's no like reason, but I just don't feel safe. And, you know, then weird shit happened. Like my house got broken into and other stuff where I was like, I should have trusted my gut.
It's really interesting too, because if you can get in touch with that deep gut sensation of whether someone is hiding from you or not, like there's a lot that you can actually put up with in relationship with others. If you know on a fundamental level, this person is worthy of my trust. They might make mistakes. They might even at sometimes like lie or deceive or just be less than their best self. But if I know that on a gut level, like I can trust them, they have my back and they trust me to have their back, then like there's a lot you can actually move through. And I mean, this kind of goes back to the, you know, the episode that we did, I think in the first season about like, sometimes people are disappointing. And I think that like,
it's true.
You know, one of the realities of our movements is that because we are all working as hard as we can inside of chronically traumatic conditions, and we are dealing with so much internal to our bodies disorder, and then internal to our movements disorder, people are going to be disappointing. People are going to make mistakes. We do have to be able to hold each other accountable. And there's so much more possibility that comes from extending trust to one another than the possibility that comes from trying to figure out just who are the few people who are our people, you know, and only working with those folks.
Deeply agree with this, Autumn. Like, this to me is actually the piece that I think people miss the most often. Like when I do the work around emergent strategy, or when I talk about trust, and I'm like, you have to move at the speed of trust, and trust the people or they become untrustworthy. Like, you know, these are words from others that have flown through my river. And I'm like, it's not a game. Like people really are like, oh yeah, trust. Like, let's do one trust building activity and then let's get to work. And like, as soon as someone causes harm, trusting is the work, but also recovering from harm to rebuild trust by being fucking honest is the other really hard work that people don't want to do. Right. And I'm like, in situations like this where the dangers are very real, actually moving at the speed of trust, like moving slower. And it's so hard to move slower with urgent conditions. Like, I understand it. And I think that we put ourselves and our communities in so much danger when we try to move quickly in a reactionary way to conditions that are I'm just like, this administration is trying to get us to react all the time. It's decentering us all the time so that we won't be able to make strategic moves towards a future beyond it. And I think it's really crucial for us to say, no, we want to slow down. We want to deepen into trust. We want to deepen into relationship with each other. That will be worth it in the long run. Like that's what we're fighting for. And we also want to know what is the ground worth fighting for and the ground not worth fighting for. And I think that's another lesson that Octavia teaches us is like, not every ground is worth the fight. Like it might be like too late for Oregon. It might be too late for certain places, to just, it's like you've made a certain commitment, to white supremacy or to patriarchy or to this place. And sometimes I do feel that way with the US, right? Where I'm just sort of like, is it, and I was talking about this someday recently, I don't know, but I was talking about this recently where I was remembering in my cellular level that we didn't even want to come here, right? Like, I feel like there's this all the time, this thing of like, oh, we're here in America, it's American, it's so important. And I'm remembering that, there were like slaves who landed in this country with no sense of where they were, with no sense of this American experiment or having to be involved in it. All of that has been like Black people saying, okay, like in spite of everything you have done, I'm going to fight for my humanity and fight for it here. And I'm going to continue to fight for it here. Right. And there's so much now that I'm like, how do we continue to fight for the humanity rather than the nation? How do we continue to fight for our humanity rather than the borders, rather than the concept of, the nation has a concept of itself. And I'm like, I don't want to have any more arguments about the concept America has of itself and what was said by our founding fathers and all this like, bullshit. Who cares? I don't care. What I care about is how do we actually engage and get excited about those who create change rather than repressing and killing them and attacking them and trolling them? And then how do we as movements create a space that is undeniable and irresistible where change is happening so it can sustain us through the trauma that is inevitable in this time?
Right. And how do we do what many, many incredible movements have modeled around the globe, which is to actually, leaning on that old anarchist principle of like building the new world in the shell of the old. How do we say we are going to begin building that network of visionary community right now? We're going to do whatever needs to be done underground, and then we will allow it, it'll be like mycelia. Like we will allow it to fruit when it's ready to, like the fruiting body will show up when it's ready to show up.
Exactly.
And those will be actual beacons of a different way of being, like a different culture, a different type of like way of even understanding like the institution of community. Like those things will actually emerge when they're ready to emerge. But until then, the focus is actually on building a relationship across time and space, building a different culture, building a different way of being, a different set of agreements that like tie us and contract us to one another. Like that, is not actually where again, like we can use the internet as a tool for that, but the internet is not that thing. And I think that like, I think that this is another one of the areas where we kind of see some faltering in the movement right now is folks like not understanding, like kind of like mistaking the finger for the moon, not understanding that like the nonprofit sector is not a movement building apparatus, but it can be used for movement building. But like nonprofits themselves, because of the way that they're structured and funded, that can't be the base of our movement. Right. But it can be a space through which we organize movement work, similar to how like the internet cannot be the base of our relationships, but it can be a tool that we use for deepening relationships or creating new ones. But I think that there is this thing that's happening right now where we are confusing some of those structures that are available to us for this. We're confusing tools that are available to us for the structures that are actually going to give us the foundation that we need.
I appreciate that.
And so I feel like, I do feel like, how do we see the internet as a tool that helps us like spin the mycelia, but not see the internet as the mycelia itself? Do you know what I mean?
I think I do. And I think that there's some brilliance in that. Like,
only
I think, just a tidge, like a tiny, tiny little bit.
Tiny little bit of brilliance.
It's really small. But I feel like there's brilliance in that because the the internet is so cloying. It's so it's so tempting, right? It's a huge temptation to feel like, oh, I can measure this and thus I am having some impact, right?
Right.
Like this many people liked it. I am having this impact. And I feel like, I'm not saying there's none. I know even for my own life, I'm like, there's stuff that I post that I'm like, I know that had impact. I get direct feedback on what that did for people. Like I know. And I think there's something around what movement actually means and what it means to be connected at the level of a vision for a new society that is backed up by being willing to be in practices of that new society. And I think that is something that's very hard to measure on the internet without it just being a performance. Yeah. And it's time, like when something like this happens where someone is attacked by the state, killed by the state, it's sort of, to me, it always is a shaking moment of like, performance will not do, right? Performance will not be enough. Like the risks are actual risks. And so the changes and the practices and the rigor of our movements and the love and trust of our movements have to also be real, because we're not dealing with the illusions of the internet or the illusions of the state. We're dealing with the real impacts. Yeah. And on that piece around the mycelium, I think so much of my goal is for us to have the humility to build underground and to have the humility to be massive underground. Yep. And it's not as sexy. It's not as, dynamic. You may not get invited, to kick it with like Lena Waithe at the Oscars or whatever, right? Like it's a thing. Like you might just be like, I may never get to do that.
You are throwing shade right now.
I did throw shade. Okay. I'm going to pull the shade back.
No, I love it. Keep going.
So
I've been listening to
but
a
I'm
lot
just
of
saying,
the
like
reads,
it's
so
less, it's less glamorous. And I do want to say, like, I'm also a huge fan of the folks who are taking on the heavy load of being a public figure who's calling for change.
Yes.
Right? Like totally. It is a dangerous thing. What Tarana Berg and Patrice Cullors and Alicia Garza and other leaders are doing of saying like, I will take it on. I will step forward and I will let you listen to what I have to say. Right. And I will organize in a way that is visible at that level. I'm like, that is incredibly brave. There's a massive risk that's being taken there. And I want to honor and respect that. But it's also backed by real organizing. So that's the place where I'm like, it's real. It's not an illusion. It's not a petition. It's not, it's a real thing. Right. But I want to say that I want the movement underground. And by underground, I don't mean like, all of our phones are off all the time and no one knows. Like, I just mean like it's happening at the level of relationship, right? So it's not like a top secret movement that we called out for on a podcast. It's like we are building real relationships with each other so that we create a mycelium network that is so strong that when a mushroom is plucked from it, when it's something, a life form is snuffed out by the state, it doesn't take out the entire network. It doesn't take out the entire movement. It doesn't take out the entire vision. If anything, there's a way that it makes us stronger and it makes us more robust, because we are like, that is someone that we loved, and our grief is going to galvanize us even more into action, and we will continue moving forward. And I think that, to me, that's the place that I want our movements to get to, where we are building such deep, real trust. And instead of canceling each other, we are finding out something has gotten broken in our network. How can we regenerate and regrow this connection? Because we don't have enough people to let any of them go. And every single person that is taken from us has to matter so much. Like I want that preciousness of the miracle of life to actually be present in our movements.
Right. Like when you think about, I don't know, is it oak trees or is it redwoods that have this way of, because their root structures are connected to one another, oak trees, they can actually, they can send nutrients to the oak trees that are sick, right? Like they can actually like transmit resources amongst themselves in order to care for the places where harm has happened.
And the fungi are the ones who are telling them like, yo,
the fungi are like, hey,
someone needs help over here. Like, I just want us to be
that's
like
the internet.
Fungi root people. Yes. So
on that note, I know that we need to close because we're coming up on time.
Are we? I never notice.
Well, I do just because I have to be
Have a
surgical
life.
with my time is why.
Yes. Surgical. Oh, can we? Oh, yeah. What were you going to say? You were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that the fungi as the internet and oak trees as the actual movement feels like a great place to like pause. But it sounds like you might have like one more special idea.
Well, actually, no. I mean, it may be special or not special, but there's something around also being ready to or being willing to take turns and rest when we need to take rest that I want to name here, because I feel like when we are grieving, we try to push forward. It's like we take the grief. It's like something horrific has happened to our community, and we don't give ourselves room to actually move any of that trauma. And we just finished this past weekend a year-long course of somatics in Detroit. And it's all about how do we take trauma, heal it, and sort of catalyze, transform and heal and catalyze that energy into movements. And state repression is one of the main areas that generative somatics is really looking at. Right. And it was just powerful to be with this group of folks, but to also see like trauma takes time to process. And if we don't give it time, there's another way that we are taking ourselves out. And we talked about it in our last episode, but I want to just really have it named that like we are also doing the work of the state without them having to do it when we are burning ourselves out and not attending to. I need time to grieve. I need time to change from one job to another. I need time to recover from a particular trauma that has happened in my movement. I need some time to recover. Right. And so I wanted to, is it okay to share with people that you're actually going to be taking some of that time and actually modeling something that we need to be doing?
Yeah. So this is my good news. Thank you, Adrienne, for pointing out that like this is something that I can share. That I recently got permission and a gift from my my co-op Aorta to be able to take a 3-month leave from work. So I'm going to be taking January through March off. Of like all work basically, and using that time to sleep, to heal, to write, and to do some travel that's really just related to like love and beloved work, awesome. And instead of like paid work, and it really is a gift from my co-op that I'm getting to do this, and I feel very like grateful that I'm part of a democratic formation where we really understand each other's bodies as like the main resource that we have, right? Yes. That like and each other's brilliance as the main resource that we have. And like we recognize that any one of our ability to care for ourselves is actually the most important thing that we can do. Yes. And I think it really, in speaking to the trauma piece, like I think it really took me understanding that what's happening to me right now has like roots that are like at least 4 years deep, and recognizing that like I needed a break in 2014 when my baby died and when the board of the organization that I had been working as executive director at like fired me 2 weeks after my baby died, right? Like that was such a traumatic experience that I didn't have the time or the economic stability or I didn't have any of the things that I needed in place to be able to actually take the time to fully go through that experience. Yeah. And I think that some part of me over the last few years really thought like, it's fine. It's in the past. I've like done a lot of my healing work around it. I don't need a break from that. Like I need a break, but it's not about that. And I think part of what happened for me in the last couple of months is really connecting the dots and being like, there are many layers of trauma, obviously, that I and anyone in my situation would be needing to work through. But there is something in terms of like what's happened to me over the last 4 years that is very related to that particular set of conditions in which, because like it was an experience of having people come after me that I thought were my people. Yes. That I had worked with and trusted as though they were my people. And they turned on me and they came for me and they took away my livelihood, right? Yes. Like that was so frightening. It was so frightening to experience. And I think that I really haven't had the space to really like work through what it meant to actually have a group of people come for me like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
and that I would say, I mean, and that group, like really that coming for you rooted in exactly these same larger systems of oppression.
Exactly.
We're talking about.
Exactly.
Right?
It was a
that
completely like repressive act of like,
yes.
we will not allow this person of color to have any kind of structural power, and we're going to do whatever it takes to like remove them from having any kind of power.
Yes.
And so I know that part of what will happen for me during this break is that I'm going to have to deal with everything that resurfaces in relationship to that.
You gonna
that's
cry,
what the break is
sleep,
for, right?
You
is like
have
to have
a good time.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to cry. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to masturbate a lot. I'm going to write.
I'm so proud of you.
Yes. I'm just going to like do all the things that are part of my healing process.
That's
Get
great.
yours.
I really want to thank you for being able to do this episode and actually being able to reach a place of connection and joy in it, because I was feeling some trepidation coming into it, because I'm like, these were hard things to live through, and they're hard things to talk about, and it's hard to still be in a situation where it's true. And I deeply believe in the deeper relationships we need, in committing to the rest we need, into looking beyond our expectations for allies, and then at a certain point being willing to give ourselves completely to the journey, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And like resting along the way. And like, here we are doing that. So I love you so much.
I love you too. I'm grateful beyond measure for this project that we're doing together, and all the ways that it just changes me and supports me and holds me accountable to like my truth and my highest good. And I just love you so much.
I feel the same way. I love you, and I feel really protective of you, right? Like, I'm like, if the state wants to come for you, they have to come through me.
All right. I'd be scared of anyone who go up against you, because I know you're a Scorpio rising. Wait, Aries rising, Scorpio moon. It's scary up in there.
I mean,
I would not want to be on your bad side, is what I'm saying, astrologically.
I feel the same way.
Exactly. People don't know. All right. People don't know. All right. Thanks for listening to our show.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter and Instagram at End of the World PC. We're also on Facebook at End of the World Show. And we are bringing all of our rising and moons, everything, to this show.
We are. We really are. You can make a sustaining donation to our show by visiting our page at patreon.com/intotheworldshow. And it really, really helps every single person involved in the show to be able to show up for it and keep working on it.
Another incredibly helpful thing you can do to help our show sustain itself is to write us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you are an iPhone person, thank you. And if you want in that review to let me know why Aries rising is not like scary from a conflict perspective, I'm happy to be corrected about that. I'm working with stereotypes. I know that.
I mean, I have to say that I have been learning to be in conflict well. Like, so I've been like, wait, I can fight you. I'm going to fight you.
I will fight you.
But I feel like that changes when it comes to you and the kids and April. And like, there's just certain people where I'm just like, oh, now we're going to fight.
Now we're going to fight, bitch.
Now we're going to fight. And I'm going to learn some Aikido to do that. Like, I have the universe in my back. So I do want to say that How to Survive the End of the World is produced and edited by the incomparable Zach Rosen.
Music for today's show comes from Tunde Olaniran.
Wait, did you know that Tunde Olaniran dropped an album today?
That's right. Say the name. Say the name.
So the album is called Stranger. I've been listening to it on NPR's First Listen, like nonstop for the past week and a half. It is a brilliant, deep, vulnerable, loving album, like with banger after banger after banger. Okay. And it's really, 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 and I'm not just saying this because like I love Tunde so much. Like I actually as objectively as I can say it, like it's a values aligned album. He's a genius, and the album is really brilliant and really beautiful and good pop. It's like good pop that talks about being vulnerable in love, and I'm like, I've been waiting for it. So I just want to say that.
I'm so excited. And we can find it where? Like Spotify?
So it's literally everywhere that music is. Like he's a real musician.
Everywhere. That's
so
right.
It's
like
all
I'm actually famous. So
yeah, he's like actually famous, and it's an actual famous album. He has a song in there called Celine Dion. Like you just have to, yes. Okay. So it's
my
so
heart
good.
will go on.
Yes,
All
literally.
right. I love you so much. Let's turn this
I love
off.
you so much. I'm going to stop recording now.